When people hear the name Paul McCartney, they usually picture one of the most recognizable figures in music history, a former Beatle, a gifted songwriter, a legendary performer, and the man behind countless unforgettable melodies. His public image has often been friendly, polished, and diplomatic. But there is another side to that story. Behind the smile and the decades of success, McCartney has also found himself at the center of some intense disagreements and rivalries. Over the years, other musicians have criticized his songwriting, questioned his approach to rock music, and even clashed with him personally. The source script presents several of these rivalries as stories involving backstage disagreements, harsh comments, creative differences, and long-running tensions. Some of the claims are attributed to insiders or reports rather than directly verified statements, so they should be treated as allegations rather than established facts. Today, we're looking at 5 musicians who, according to the source material, had complicated or hostile relationships with Paul McCartney. And the final name may be the most surprising of all. Number 5. Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury was famous for his enormous personality, theatrical performances, and extraordinary vocal ability. Paul McCartney, meanwhile, became known for melodic songwriting and a very different approach to popular music. According to the script, tension between the two reportedly developed during the 1970s, when Queen and Wings were working at London's Air Studios. The story claims that Mercury felt McCartney's music was becoming too safe and predictable. Rather than keeping those feelings completely private, he allegedly mocked some of Paul's songs and made his opinion known around the studio. The supposed rivalry reportedly became more noticeable at award events. According to the source, Mercury was unhappy about McCartney receiving recognition for his work and allegedly considered Paul's music too lightweight compared with the harder and more theatrical direction he believed rock should take. The disagreement supposedly became even sharper as the decade continued. The two represented almost opposite philosophies of performance. Mercury was interested in spectacle, drama, theatricality, and powerful stage presentation. McCartney's greatest strength was often his ability to create melodies that could reach enormous audiences without relying on excessive complexity. That difference may have been exactly what made the alleged rivalry so interesting. The source also connects their tension to Live Aid in 1985. Queen's performance became one of the defining moments of the event, while McCartney's appearance reportedly experienced technical problems. The script portrays Mercury as seeing the contrast as proof of the difference between Queen's approach and McCartney's. Whether every detail of these stories is accurate or not, the larger contrast is fascinating. Both men were major entertainers, but they approached their craft from completely different directions. Mercury pushed toward theatrical grandeur, while McCartney relied heavily on melody, songwriting, and emotional accessibility. In another universe, those differences might have created an incredible collaboration. Instead, according to the source, they became part of a rivalry. Number 4. Yoko Ono. Few relationships in Beatles history are as complicated as the one involving Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and Yoko Ono. Yoko Ono's presence during the Beatles' final years became one of the most controversial subjects surrounding the group. According to the source material, McCartney was uncomfortable with the constant presence of Ono during recording sessions and believed the band's working environment was changing. The script describes moments in which Paul allegedly felt that Yoko was interfering with the band's creative process. One story claims he complained that whenever he looked up from his bass, Ono seemed to be nearby. As the Beatles moved toward their eventual breakup, tensions became even more complicated. After the band's dissolution, McCartney took legal action to formally end the partnership. The source portrays this decision as something Ono viewed as a betrayal, adding another layer of bitterness to an already difficult period. The conflict became closely connected to John Lennon's post-Beatles work. Lennon's song, How Do You Sleep, became famous for its personal attack on McCartney, turning private tensions into something that audiences around the world could hear. The source also claims that even years later, Ono and McCartney continued to have complicated feelings about one another. Yet there is an important detail here. Relationships surrounding the Beatles were rarely simple. McCartney, Lennon, and Ono were dealing with enormous fame, artistic disagreements, personal loyalties, business problems, and the emotional collapse of one of the world's biggest bands. That environment made every disagreement more intense. According to the source, McCartney later described working with Ono as extremely difficult because they approached art from completely different perspectives. Whether or not every alleged private remark can be verified, the broader history clearly demonstrates how dramatically the Beatles' internal relationships changed during their final years. And that brings us to another musician whose philosophy of music was almost the complete opposite of McCartney's. Number 3, Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa was known for experimentation, technical ambition, satire, and an unwillingness to follow conventional musical formulas. Paul McCartney, on the other hand, was one of the world's most successful melody-driven songwriters. The source presents their relationship as a clash between two completely different ideas about what rock music should be. According to the script, the tension began around the era of Sgt. Pepper, when Zappa's work reportedly mocked the Beatles' increasingly elaborate image. The disagreement was not simply personal. It was artistic. Zappa believed music could be strange, complicated, challenging, and deliberately unconventional. McCartney's greatest strength was his ability to turn relatively simple musical ideas into songs that millions of people could immediately connect with. Those philosophies naturally created friction. The source claims that when the two eventually crossed paths, McCartney was unimpressed by Zappa's approach. Zappa, meanwhile, allegedly viewed McCartney's songwriting as overly commercial and predictable. The disagreement reportedly continued throughout the 1970s. According to the script, the two musicians even attempted to avoid one another during a television production, with McCartney allegedly asking for separate schedules and dressing arrangements. The supposed comments exchanged between them illustrate the central argument. Was musical greatness about experimentation and technical complexity? Or was it about writing a melody so powerful that ordinary people could remember it decades later? The source describes one alleged McCartney criticism of Zappa's music as a joke comparing the sound to something chaotic and uncontrolled. Zappa reportedly responded by attacking the simplicity of mainstream songwriting. At its core, this was more than a personal disagreement. It represented one of rock music's oldest debates: accessibility versus experimentation. McCartney proved that simple melodies could become timeless. Zappa proved that music could challenge listeners and still develop a devoted audience. Their approaches were radically different, and according to the source, Number 2, Keith Richards. Keith Richards and Paul McCartney came from two bands that helped define British rock, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. For decades, fans often viewed the Beatles and Stones as friendly competitors. But according to the source, Richards had much stronger opinions about McCartney's musical personality. The biggest disagreement was philosophical. McCartney represented precision, melody, structure, and polished songwriting. Richards represented raw guitar-driven rock, attitude, looseness, and an almost rebellious sense of authenticity. The source claims Richards believed Paul's music was too clean and controlled for true rock and roll. He allegedly described McCartney as a talented songwriter, but questioned whether his polished image represented genuine rock culture. Richards reportedly also mocked some of McCartney's softer Beatles compositions, considering them examples of the kind of sentimental music that did not fit his personal definition of rock. The rivalry supposedly became more complicated during the late 1960s. When the Rolling Stones released their Satanic Majesty's Request, comparisons with the Beatles' increasingly experimental work were unavoidable. According to the source, Richards later believed the Stones had been drawn into a competition that McCartney had helped create. Whether that interpretation was fair or not, it demonstrates how competitive the British rock scene could become. Both bands were constantly compared. Both had enormous audiences. Both were trying to define what rock music could become. The tension reportedly continued into later decades. The source describes an alleged backstage encounter in which Richards reacted coldly when McCartney attempted to compliment him. Again, the contrast between the two personalities is what makes this story compelling. McCartney built a career around melody and carefully constructed songs. Richards built his reputation around instinct, riffs, and a raw musical identity. Yet despite the reported tension, both men remain giants of rock history. Their rivalry was never simply about one musician being better than another. It was about two completely different definitions of authenticity. And then comes the relationship that may have been the most painful of all. Number 1. John Lennon. At number 1 is John Lennon. Unlike the other names on this list, Lennon wasn't simply another musician competing with McCartney. He was his songwriting partner, bandmate, friend, and one half of the creative partnership that helped transform popular music. That is exactly why their conflict became so emotional. During the Beatles' final years, the relationship between Lennon and McCartney reportedly became increasingly strained. The source describes McCartney as becoming more assertive after manager Brian Epstein's death, while Lennon became increasingly resistant to Paul's influence. Their songwriting partnership had once been one of music's greatest strengths. But by the end of the Beatles' era, their different personalities and artistic ambitions were pulling them in opposite directions. Lennon wanted greater experimentation and personal expression. McCartney often focused on melody, arrangement, and craftsmanship. According to the source, Lennon dismissed some of Paul's songs as overly sentimental, while McCartney was reportedly frustrated by Lennon's increasingly experimental direction. After the Beatles broke up, the conflict became even more public. Lennon's "How Do You Sleep?" became one of the most famous musical attacks ever aimed at a former bandmate. The song was widely interpreted as a direct response to McCartney and demonstrated just how deeply their relationship had deteriorated. For fans, this was shocking. These were two men who had once created songs together that changed the world. Now, they were publicly criticizing each other's work. The source also describes Lennon questioning some of McCartney's songwriting and production choices, while Paul reportedly felt that Lennon sometimes prioritized experimentation over musical accessibility. But beneath the anger, there was still a complicated bond. The source claims that during the years following the Beatles' breakup, Lennon privately acknowledged that McCartney understood him in a way few other people could. That detail is especially significant. It suggests that the hostility between them did not erase the connection they had built over years of collaboration. Their relationship was complicated precisely because they mattered so much to each other creatively. They could frustrate one another, challenge one another, and still recognize that neither would have become the same artist without the other. The source portrays their relationship as a perfect example of how powerful creative partnerships can eventually become sources of conflict. The same differences that produced extraordinary music can also create resentment. The unexpected twist: Elvis Costello. The source places Elvis Costello at the top of its ranking, largely because his story has an unexpected ending. Costello emerged during the punk and new wave era with a reputation for sharp lyrics, intelligence, and a deliberately rebellious image. In the beginning, he reportedly represented almost everything that McCartney's polished legacy seemed to oppose. According to the source, Costello criticized the Beatles' former bassist for representing an older generation of comfortable rock stars while younger musicians were responding to social and political changes. He allegedly viewed McCartney as a symbol of the musical establishment. That attitude reportedly followed Costello into performances, interviews, and public appearances. The source describes a charity event where Costello allegedly avoided being photographed with McCartney and made a dismissive remark about Paul's relevance. McCartney was reportedly offended, but the story did not end there. Years later, something unexpected happened. Instead of continuing the rivalry, McCartney reached out to Costello about working together. The collaboration forced both musicians to reconsider their assumptions about each other. Costello reportedly challenged Paul's ideas rather than simply agreeing with him, and that creative tension became productive. Instead of destroying the sessions, their differences helped generate new ideas. Their songwriting partnership eventually produced songs that were praised as some of McCartney's strongest work from that period. The source presents this as the ultimate lesson of the entire story. Sometimes the person who criticizes you most strongly can also be the person who pushes you creatively. Costello had spent years viewing McCartney as a symbol of everything he wanted to challenge. Then he discovered that the very qualities he had criticized could become valuable when combined with his own approach. Final thoughts. Paul McCartney's career has lasted for generations, and his public image has generally been associated with charm, creativity, and musical brilliance. But the stories in this countdown present a more complicated picture. From alleged disagreements with Freddie Mercury and Yoko Ono to artistic clashes involving Frank Zappa and Keith Richards, McCartney repeatedly encountered musicians who questioned his methods and his place in rock history. Then there was John Lennon, whose relationship with Paul was far more complicated because it combined friendship, creativity, competition, and personal history. And finally, Elvis Costello demonstrated that even intense artistic criticism can eventually lead to collaboration. The biggest lesson may be that musical rivalries are not always about hatred. Sometimes they're about different visions. Sometimes they're about competition. And sometimes, surprisingly, conflict becomes the reason two artists create something better together. Paul McCartney's legacy ultimately survived all of these disagreements. The debates surrounding his music may continue, but his influence on popular music is undeniable. So, which of these rivalries surprised you the most? Was it John Lennon and Paul McCartney's complicated partnership, Keith Richards' criticism, Frank Zappa's artistic opposition, the reported tension involving Yoko Ono, or the unexpected transformation of Elvis Costello from critic to collaborator? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the lesser-known conflicts surrounding one of music's biggest legends, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more celebrity and music stories.